get started. Once again, I'm Bill Mickey. On behalf of Choice, I'd like to welcome everyone to today's program, Meet the Filmmakers Igniting Classroom Discussions, which is sponsored by ProQuest, part of Clarivate, and Film Platform. This session is one in a series of sponsored webinars from Choice and ACRL that addresses new ideas and developments of interest to the academic library community. I'll put some links into the chat real quick where you can register for upcoming Choice webinars and also watch our previous webinar recordings on Choice's YouTube channel. And before we get started, I'd like to point out a few features of the webinar software for everyone. All attendees who join the presentation are automatically muted and your cameras are off, so don't worry about generating noise or feedback. We've got that taken care of for you. We are using the Q&A feature today. Please use it to ask questions of our speakers and to submit any comments. We'll answer as many questions as we have time for, so please type your questions and comments into the Q&A module as they occur to you. You can also use the upvote feature to highlight questions you like or would like to be addressed. If we don't get to your question, ProQuest will answer any outstanding questions in a follow-up. Also, there is a closed captioning available for today's session. To toggle the automated captions on or off, please use the Show Captions button on the bottom panel of your screen. You can also turn on automated translation for the captions by clicking the arrow button, toggling on translation, and selecting your preferred language. Last, please note that we are recording today's program. The recording will be shared and repurposed online after the live session. Submitted questions and comments will be included in the recording. And by submitting your questions, you are providing permission for those to be used for these purposes. Everyone who registered will receive a follow-up email with a link to the archived version of this presentation. And with that, we are ready to get started. So I will hand it over to our moderator for today, Annie from Film Platform.
Thanks so much, Bill. And hello to everyone joining us today. I'm Annie Roney, co-founder of Film Platform, and I'm thrilled to be moderating today's panel. My career has been devoted to connecting great documentaries with a variety of audiences around the world and educational communities. I've seen how films can do something textbooks alone can't: spark curiosity, build empathy, and inspire students to think more deeply about the world. Today, we'll hear directly from filmmakers whose work is available on Film Platform, through academic video online. We'll explore how documentaries can be used in colleges and universities, from assignments to campus-wide screenings, and how libraries can support faculty with integrating documentaries into curricula. Today's students are entering classrooms with vastly different expectations. They're digital natives, overwhelmed by content, and often disconnected from traditional text-based materials. Documentaries can bridge that gap, offering emotional entry points, real-world context, and critical complexity. Our filmmakers today aren't just artists. They're storytellers whose work is increasingly used as curriculum anchors across disciplines. They are the filmmakers behind the documentaries RBG, John Lewis, Good Trouble, Floyd Abrams, Speaking Freely, and The Arc of Oblivion. So let's watch the trailers for their films.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg changed the way the world is for American women.
I became a lawyer when women were not wanted by the legal profession.
Thousands of state and federal laws discriminated on the basis of gender. She was following in the footsteps of the battle for racial equality. She wanted equal protection for women.
Men and women are persons of equal dignity, and they should count equally before the law.
She captured for the male members of the court what it was like to be a second-class citizen.
The point is that the discriminatory line almost inevitably hurts women.
I did see myself as kind of a kindergarten teacher in those days because the judges didn't think sex discrimination existed.
I surely would not be in this room today without the determined efforts of men and women who kept dreams alive.
My philosophy is very simple. When you see something that is not right, not fair, not just, say something, do something, get in trouble, good trouble, necessary trouble.
He was always different than every member of Congress. Everybody knew what he had done. He was John Lewis.
We're marching today to dramatize to the world that hundreds and thousands of Negro citizens denied the right to vote.
Congressman Lewis gave us the blueprint to organize and to legislate.
The reason why he's effective as a leader is because he lived it.
There are forces in America today want to take us back, but we're not going back. We're going forward.
Floyd Abrams is almost First Amendment embodiment when he takes a principled position on behalf of the press or a publisher of a book. He's taking a position on behalf of all of us who need to know what's in that book.
The system protects free speech more broadly rather than narrowly.
Floyd was a legal rock star. His greatest contributions were making sure the press couldn't be stopped from publishing the truth and couldn't be punished for publishing the truth. Those things were not well established before Floyd Abrams hit the scene.
The more we make it difficult to express dissenting or controversial views, the less we can move, the less we can change, the less we can even understand. We have to lean very strongly in the direction of free expression, whatever the future may bring us.
Why are you building this?
Everyone has an archive of sorts. A diary, a hard drive, even the pyramids of Egypt. We're all asking in some form, what from this world is worth saving?
Why don't we have the story of every person who's ever lived?
You don't have to go into cosmic timescales for us to be less than an afterthought.
Nature stores memories with one hand and destroys them with the other. The universe pulls everything apart.
An arc marks a journey.
I'm looking for pharmaceuticals. They can have effects on wildlife.
You can go anywhere on Earth and find archives. But here's the thing. By exploring the archive, we change it.
When you say the Ark, you're talking Noah's Ark?
This will go beyond all of our deaths.
Entre mille, sauver l'humanité. Look at my works, ye mighty and despair. It can't get any better. That is poetry.
Thank you. These are truly wonderful films, and I'm so struck by how each one of them are really speaking to the moment we're in, which I think is really fascinating. And thank you so much to our filmmakers here who have worked so tirelessly to bring us these stories. So for those interested in asking questions throughout the session, we ask that you put them into the Q&A below. We'll do our best to get to as many questions as possible. And as a reminder, this webinar is being recorded and will be shared and repurposed after the live session. Please note that in submitting a question here, you are providing permission for us to use it in the live discussion, as well as in the recorded sessions that will be used post-event. We'd also love for you to say hello in the Q&A box and let us know where you are tuning in from. We know there's people tuning in from all over the world, so welcome. Please do say hello. And now let's meet our filmmakers. Our first filmmaker is Julie Cohen. Julie is an Oscar-nominated, award-winning filmmaker. She and directing partner, Betsy West, directed and produced RBG, one of the 25 highest-grossing documentaries of all time. Thank you for being with us, Julie.
Great to be here.
Next, I'd like to introduce Dawn Porter, an Emmy Award-winning filmmaker, founder of Trilogy Films, and director of John Lewis' Good Trouble. So wonderful to have you with us, Dawn. Thanks.
Thank you, Annie.
Next up, we have Yael Melamed, acclaimed director of Floyd Abrams' Speaking Freely, and co-founder of Salty Features, with credits including the Oscar-winning Innocente and the Emmy-winning When I Walk. Thank you for joining us, Yael.
Thank you.
And last but not least, we have Ian Chaney, Emmy-nominated director of The Arc of Oblivion and co-director of Picture a Scientist. Great to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
Hello.
So each of the films we're discussing today have found their way into syllabi. We know that. Not because they're educational in a didactic sense, but because they provoke discussion, challenge assumptions, and illuminate systems students are just beginning to understand. So let's jump in. Our first question focuses on how your film or films align with academic disciplines and what you hope students might take away from classroom viewings. Julie, let's start with you. RBG has been used everywhere from law schools to gender studies programs. Where do you see it fitting most powerfully in academic settings? And what do you hope students take from it?
Yeah, I think it can fit in pretty broadly, and I have big hopes for a variety of things students can take from the film. Obviously, it's right at home in any kind of women's history class or a constitutional law class. But I think it could be really broader than that. Justice Ginsburg's life before and after getting to the Supreme Court really spans a huge portion of mid to late 20th century and then early 21st century history. So there's all kinds of historical stuff. It would fit in very nicely in a political science class because there's a political angle about how the judiciary and the executive get along. It would fit in really nicely in an oratory class if anyone's, in that kind of thing, because her story tells you a lot about how you can speak powerfully but quietly. I think, my hope for what people take away from the film, in a way, all of our films are teaching you stuff without seeming like they're teaching you stuff by engaging you with a human being. So people have engaged with RBG's story in so many different ways. We were, first of all, it made people rethink the legal profession. Like, we were really thrilled by how many people said, particularly young women, wanted to go to law school after seeing the film. We were also, it's so interesting to see how people engage with Justice Ginsburg, who became this superstar internet meme, but also is extremely introverted, as the film makes clear. So there's really a lot for, these films are pretty rich, not just mine, but all four of them, and so many in your collection. There's just a lot for people to grasp onto.
Wow, that's great. Thank you so much, Julie. Over to you, Dawn. John Lewis' Good Trouble has sparked campus-wide screenings, classroom debates, and really feels right now like a template for how we think of moving forward. I wonder how you see it supporting teaching across disciplines, and I also wonder if you would offer up, what do you think John Lewis would say?
Oh, I love that question so much. So I had the remarkable experience with traveling with the congressman for more than a year. And so we were able to film him not only at work in the legislature, but on the campaign trail, at home. And what he really was so brilliant at doing is connecting with people and having them understand that he saw himself as a regular person who wanted to help all Americans live their most fulfilling and productive lives. And so one of the great lessons I have from traveling with the congressman is that there is always something that you can do to be helpful as a citizen. So I have the great pleasure of being not only a filmmaker, but I'm also a teacher. And so I am teaching a college course at Williams College about democracy in film. And one of the ways that I use film in the classroom is by allowing people, particularly right now when history, the opportunity to teach history, particularly history about civil rights, is being challenged, and in some cases eliminated or restricted. What we did in John Lewis is we showed him acting as a congressman at the present, but then also went back in history and showed the students what he did as a young person and had him explain what it was like for him to not only live and act, but to strategize. And so people really respond to the idea that John Lewis didn't think he was remarkable. And he thinks there's something that every single person can do to promote democracy, freedom, and equality. So it was a great pleasure to make that film, and it continues to be used. And I'm so thrilled also that we have a curriculum guide and thought, a document that it helps instructors use the film in the classroom.
Yeah, thank you. And I think we put the curriculum guide in the chat for any of you who are interested. Thanks, Dawn. Yael, let's go to you next. Your film on Floyd Abrams has been used in journalism, law schools, and institutions focusing on free expression. As the First Amendment has become a very contested, hot topic right now in America, where do you see your film resonating most on campus, and what do you hope students take from it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the film can be used also very broadly. Floyd Abrams is one of the most influential First Amendment lawyers of the past 50 years. The cases he's been involved with and has had the good fortune to be involved with have shaped the very constitutional landscape of free speech and press freedoms that we understand today. I think it's really interesting that two of the films today are about lawyers and the Constitution, because I think constitutional law offers a really compelling subject for understanding ourselves as a society over time and how we got to certain places where we are on important issues. So it's history and sociology and psychology and much more all wrapped together. The film itself isn't just a dry legal history. It has case stories, lots of dramatic archival footage, and Floyd's own reflections. And I think that this film, as all the other films, can make these kind of dry seeming issues come alive. In this film, students can see why lofty principles, constitutional principles, actually matter in their lives. And I think this film can be useful right now because it doesn't align itself, and Floyd does not align himself with any particular ideology other than a profound belief in free speech and the need to often protect terrible speech in order to protect the right of free speech more generally. Floyd has made the left and the right angry with him and happy with him over his entire career, and I think that's helpful right now. Beyond the obvious audience of law students, the documentary can be used in political science, journalism, history, communications, philosophy, ethics. So I think it can be helpful. It kind of both has connects to real life, but also has an abstraction to it that allows people to talk about principles. So it reminds us, I think, that these core principles tested for the last decades still shape the hardest questions that we're facing today.
Thank you for making the film. Ian, your films have been used in both STEM and humanities classrooms. The Arc of Oblivion provides us with insights from a number of different disciplines: biology, art, archaeology, philosophy, to name a few. And it has really special significance to librarians and library science. Can you tell us how your film can be useful across these disciplines?
Yeah, well, first, when I found out we were going to be talking to people who had library science backgrounds, I was just so delighted. This is a treat. So, because in many ways, sort of a big takeaway for me in making the film was that, the universe all around us is an archive. I mean, there's certain kind of maybe very familiar examples of this, like tree rings and rock layers that store stories of the past, starlight, but also like a student's desk chair in the classroom with the gum stuck under it and initials carved into it, bears traces of the people who have come before. And, the stories we tell and that are oral histories, Aboriginal stories from Australia contain traces of climate events from 50,000 years ago. So if you sort of put your archive glasses on, the world suddenly becomes this unbelievably rich place full of stories. So that's kind of a pan-disciplinary perspective, which is my sort of academic background, as somebody who could never sort of settle into one discipline. But there are also, I think, ways in which the film can be used in different disciplines on a campus or in high school. I mean, certainly in biology, the natural world, mostly through DNA, contains an amount of data, a kind of archive of data, of information that dwarfs all the data we have in all our storage centers. And as we lose species, we're therefore sort of losing a kind of data and kind of stories about our past and where we've come from. There's also, of course, architecture and archaeology. There are these mosques in the Maldives that are made out of coral. They carved coral. There are no trees or whatever. They carved coral out of the seashore and built these beautiful mosques that now contain both a kind of biological trace of the past, but also through the architecture, a kind of reflection and stories of the people who settled there. So I think philosophically, it's been really rich in our conversations too. Questions of what should we save from this world, from our own lives? What stories deserve to be retold? What should be destroyed? Who gets the right to tell their stories? What do we do when certain people's stories have been intentionally erased? And that becomes kind of a political story as well. So archives, as you library scientists know, are in many ways all-encompassing. And I guess the last thing I'd mention is that I see filmmaking as a kind of archival practice. We as filmmakers are all making decisions. Ideally, we'd like to save everything and put it all in the films and make 90-hour films. But the practice of making choices about what stories we tell are reflections of our values and our sense of what should be carried on in the world, which I think is an important perspective for artists and filmmakers and journalists to think about as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Ian. And thinking about the ways that right now history is getting removed from the Smithsonian, this film feels like it is really could be useful in this moment with speaking around the idea of what we save and what we cherish and what we think is important for mankind to understand and have access to. So thank you. We'd love to hear from you all a little bit more about experiences you've had with screening your film, either in a classroom, I know some of you teach, or attending a campus screening, or just other screenings where your films have been seen in an educational setting. Are there certain topics or themes in your film that spark the most discussion or the most engagement with students? If you had any particularly interesting feedback from students where you've screened. Yael, let's start with you this time.
Sure. I mean, I love the capacity for films to bring people together. I think they're amazing teaching tools and community building opportunities. I think they provide a shared visual and emotional time and a kind of experience that a group goes through together that is unmatched by kind of reading on your own. And it takes the conversation away from the abstract or the overly personal, just allowing for very rich debate. So like all of our films, this one in particular can be used either as a full film or in clips. And the clips for this film cover specific issues of censorship, national security, press freedom, confidential sources, money in speech, and technology in speech. It's been used in a lot of different ways by many different departments. So it's been law schools and journalism schools, but it's also been used by philosophy professors and even conferences like the Vanderbilt Global Free Speech Summit or multidisciplinary centers like UChicago's Forum for Free Expression. We had a really memorable event at Harvard sponsored by the Hellenic Studies Department comparing free speech today to free speech during ancient Greek times, which was actually amazing. And then I thought I would share, I wrote somewhere, I quoted from a letter that somebody sent Floyd, an essay that they wrote after they'd seen the film. And this is about the attempt by Mayor Rudy Giuliani to shut down an art exhibition in New York at the Brooklyn Museum in 1999. So the student wrote, "When the film discussed an art gallery featuring some pieces that were not completely reverent to certain religious figures, my initial reaction was, how dare they? This should never be allowed to happen. I'm embarrassed to admit this because in all other cases, I take an absolutist approach to the First Amendment. This was the same battle I faced during our discussion on Snyder versus Phelps. I fumed at the thought of protesters outside a veteran's funeral with vile signs. According to the statistics, most of America agreed with me. I thought they should be locked up and humiliated, but quickly checked myself and recalled speech I fundamentally detest is still speech. In the same way, my thoughts about the art gallery quickly shifted. Although I may not like it, I believe in their right to say it. This is something I expect to struggle with moving forward, especially when there is a religious component. America is plagued with a sort of auditory entitlement, where anything they do not like to hear is immediately deemed violent or hateful and worthy of condemnation. I must not succumb to this. This introduction to the film deeply resonated with me because it pierced a part of me that hesitates to uphold all speech as free."
Wow, that must have made you feel great.
Yeah, and there were a few like that. Yeah, it was lovely. So
Thanks for sharing. Thank you.
Okay.
And Dawn, I know you've had many different experiences screening many of your films, but specifically for John Lewis, can you tell us a little bit about those experiences and how students have reacted?
Yeah, the congressman passed away shortly after the film was finished. And so I think a number of his colleagues, so we've screened before the Congress, before the Black Caucus, and in a number of colleges, universities, but also in high schools and even middle schools. And one of the most meaningful for me was we recently did a video talk back after high school students had screened the film. And I think that their questions about protest and about behavior during protest, appropriateness of protest, a necessity for protest, were really, really thoughtful. This is a group of sophomores and juniors who were thinking about their place in political activism. Um, and I think what the congressman modeled was civil, respectful demonstration. And I think that that was very meaningful to some who were struggling with their emotions. And as Yael just so beautifully described, the experience of sitting with a piece of work like a film for an extended period of time, where you can watch a subject and in a thoughtful, calm manner, kind of experience, have a number of different experiences, is really unique in our classrooms. Students and all of us are living in such a fast-paced environment. It's hard to give them this time for reflection and thought. We're asking them to respond immediately all of the time. And what the films do is allow you to settle and think about what you think and formulate questions interrogate yourself. And so I was so thrilled with the questions we got from the high schoolers. And I know I'm positive. I had this experience while traveling with Mr. Lewis. I'm positive that Mr. Lewis would be thrilled by this. While we were making the film, we traveled with John Lewis to a civil rights museum in Alabama. And when we walked in, the first image you see, which was unknown to all of us, is a clip of John Lewis as a 19-year-old. And he was watching the footage of himself. There was a high school class that was on a tour, and he turned to the student next to him and he said, "Sometimes I can't believe that's me. I can't believe that I did that." And it really impressed upon me, as Ian is speaking, that John Lewis was living history. And one of the things I'm so pleased and proud about is our collecting the images and assembling the film allows people to understand this living history. And it has certainly not disappeared, and it is much more accessible to so many more people. So those are just a few examples of some really meaningful interactions with this particular movie.
Yeah, thank you. That's so inspiring. And I'm really pleased that, with academic video online, that these stories are available on so many campuses around the world. And we thank you, librarians, for like championing them on your campus. So maybe just we have time for one more. Ian, do you want to talk a little bit about how students have responded to your film?
Sure. Yeah, I guess I'll mention two things. Yeah, I've done a bit of teaching, and a lot of students have a lot of anxiety and about a lot of things. There's any number of things to be anxious about, but climate anxiety is one of them. And there's a way that a film about archives and oblivion, I mean, could kind of amplify that anxiety. But we have sort of a whimsical tone to the film. And through that, we look at deep time and big expanses of time, which is kind of hard to get your head around. But I've been impressed by engaging with students who are able to sort of, in a way, like map that deep time story onto our current moment. Not as a way to dismiss everything that's happening and say nothing matters, everything's just going to go willy-nilly in the long run, but as a sort of strangely calming perspective resetting act. And I think that's something you find in the study of history as well, the rhymes across history that can sometimes be instructive or reassuring. But I've been impressed by that aspect of their perspective on the film. And the other thing is, students do archive projects after watching the film where they'll make a miniature museum of found objects that each tell a story. And so there's a kind of a recognition of themselves as curators or archivists or storytellers that I think is kind of an invitation into the work and the creation that I've really loved seeing.
All right, thank you. Amazing. By the way, I believe there's a question poll that we'd love our attendees to note. So please take a look at that. Yeah, I spoke before about how we really trust the librarians on campuses to really have the expertise to help professors find materials that will be useful in their classes, and of course to help students as well. I think some of you have sort of addressed this in different ways, but if you were able to speak to a media librarian, how would you like them to introduce your film to the faculty? If we could maybe start with you, Julie.
So, I think we have the advantage, especially if you're talking about American students, where people will probably be familiar, even from the title, with the three initials of our subject's name, RBG. And I think the fun thing for a librarian in introducing this to faculty is that, like, in some ways, the point of our film is, like, you might think, especially young people who know RBG from her internet memes. Dawn and I have the very similar experience of having made a film, spending a lot of time with a living person who was elderly, who then passed away shortly after the film's release, which so it feels doubly special to have captured this kind of incredible and iconic person. But it's basically a way to say, like, oh, you might have heard a little something about this person. You actually have, your students are going to have seen images and maybe know a little bit about RBG as a dissenter. This is just a way to go way deeper and understand that there was a whole person that changed the world in all kinds of ways behind images that the person has already seen and we'll get to see some more of in the film. Like, well, I think when we're trying to promote our film, or this film or any other I've worked on in the world, I'm never trying to talk about what's important about it. I'm more focusing on what an interesting watching experience and what a special watching experience it's going to be, that there's humor, that our story is very much, we like to call it a feminist love story, and that there is something you can be both, you can, that those two things are not an oxymoron, that there's there can be romance and equal rights between genders go together actually quite nicely, as I think our film shows. So I mean, I don't, in some ways I don't want to step in and say how to talk to educators, but I think there is a way to, I mean, young people have really connected with our story in ways that we didn't expect. I didn't think we were making a film for young people and kids, and in fact that was a huge part of our audience. And the most memorable experience I had talking to a young person was asking what their impression of a young lady, a middle school girl, asking what she thought of RBG, and she said, in this very positive way, she was so ambitious. That's what she took from the film, and it really gave me a chill, because that's absolutely right. Absolutely, she was ambitious. I was really glad that a young woman would recognize ambition and think of ambition as a good thing, because there are times when a woman's ambition has been not viewed as our as a great characteristic. So
Thank you. Yeah. And Dawn, I wanted to ask you, librarians don't only sort of facilitate professors and students who are looking for resources. They also work with student groups who are looking to host campus-wide screenings. How would you position John Lewis Good Trouble right now to encourage librarians to make this film available for a campus-wide screening?
I think very much as Julie has said, John Lewis is a figure that some people have heard a bit about. Other groups have seen a bit of the footage of the march in Selma, where he is in the lead and is beaten very badly. And I think one of the strengths of the film is having him speak to those moments and give more context to what happened. So the students, I think it really does actually inform history in a way that is important. What John Lewis describes is that they didn't just randomly begin marching, that there was a very careful and thoughtful process involving training, conversations with political leaders as well as religious leaders about how they would organize and how the marches were part of that, just a part of that organization. But there was so much more to the strategy that the young people were employing. So I think what I really like to emphasize is there are these famous or infamous moments in history. And one of the things that this film allows you to do is to pull back and understand not just that particular moment, but all of the moments that led up to that iconic moment, and then what followed. And then to understand that we are still reliving some of these same questions, maybe not in the identical way, but the underlying tensions are often still present. And this gives an opportunity to talk about those and to talk about what equality actually means. So I think it's a strong place to start difficult conversations.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yael, I'm gonna ask you a question about really speaking to the same thing, like why should librarians be engaged with Floyd Abrams? And I wonder if you can just speak to like, why did you think you should make this film about Floyd? Like, what was it, what spoke to you that you needed to tell this story? We know how hard it is to make a documentary film, so why Floyd?
Yeah, I think he's such an interesting way to look at where we are now on issues of free speech. And what I love about him, and a little bit, Don was speaking about this, but his story allows us to understand how we got to where we got on issues of free speech. And I think that I love the way he talks about it because he has so much empathy for the other side on really difficult cases. So, his first case as a young man that really made him famous is the Pentagon Papers. And it was a really tough case. And in the film, he talks about why it's such a tough case. He doesn't say, we were absolutely right, and the other side was just silly or had no leg to stand on. He kind of says this was really difficult. And I think he would say under a different time in history, the case might have gone a different way. And the very issues in the Pentagon Papers case and in all kinds of cases, in all the cases that are in the movie, are in front of us right now. The Pentagon Papers, the notion about national security that very notion is very real right now as the Pentagon tries to limit what journalists can say and the access that they will be given right now. So this is all being relitigated. And similarly for issues around confidential sources and journalists, and even money and politics, and then more abstractly notions around AI and technology, which we touch on in the film. So I think it's a way to appreciate the difficulty of some of these issues, and to understand how we got to where we are, and to kind of think about where we need to go in a non-judgmental way, but with a lot of passion and authenticity and integrity. And I often say about the film that Floyd was involved in Citizens United for Citizens United, which is a very probably without a doubt, the most unpopular case he ever was involved with. And I really wanted people to have the experience of really liking somebody they profoundly disagreed with. And I think the film offers that too.
Yes, well said. Thank you. And I think we have another poll question popping up, so take a look at that. Ian, I want to go to you another time about, again, like we're speaking to librarians. You literally built an ark in the backyard of your parents' property to store your hard drives, and then to consider if they mattered and would anyone watch them. You're speaking to a group of librarians today that could have the opportunity to not only watch your film, but to push it out to their students and faculty on campus. What would you want to say to them?
Well, yeah. I guess that description of the film, which is pretty accurate, raises a lot of questions, and that is kind of that is kind of what I wanted to say about the film, is that it's a film that I hope helps students ask a lot of new questions. You know, I don't know, when I was a kid, I think I would watch films and they were either sort of like a very tidy story or they were just like a container for delivering facts. But I've been trying, you know, for years to kind of reframe my view of these films as really like the beginning of a journey for somebody. And so I think the film contains, you know, it's sort of shot all over the world as we then keep coming back to this little field in Maine, building an ark, sort of quixotic mission. But each chapter raises new questions that I think are really great fodder for students to pursue on their own, and kind of launch a new research project. So I think the idea that films are kind of doorways or invitations or, you know, really the beginning of something, is a sort of framing I would use for many documentary films, and in particular for a film like this about archives. And I guess I would also encourage them to be watched together. I think there's something real, you know, even if it's 3 people in somebody's dorm room watching it together, that experience of sort of laughing and wondering together. It's also an experience of wondering what your classmates are thinking about and wondering about. And I think that, you know, kind of active curiosity and respectful conversation with your peers, you know, about common questions is sort of, you know, is very foundational for democracy and for our culture. So so I would encourage, you know, the launching of questions and then the togetherness of watching films as part of this experience.
Yeah, and the idea of asking questions is perfectly timed. We want to turn to we have some questions in the chat. I know that we're going to get to as many as we can. We also had some folks send in some questions ahead of time. So let me get to some of those. Someone asked, how is bias addressed in documentary films? Would one of you like to answer that? How about Yael?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the best, you know, one of the things that the film on Floyd is useful for is that people can argue different sides of a case. And that Floyd actually, what I love about him is he can argue both sides of a case really well, and sometimes in the film he does. So I think there is a clear bias in the film towards the importance of free expression. So if that is a bias, that is definitely there. But we really tried to show the difficulty of these issues philosophically, historically, in context, and why someone like Floyd thinks it's so important to pay the price in order to assure the rights of everyone to free speech. So we always make films that are very much in the gray zone. They're not trying to make people think a certain way. And so I think this film, while certainly it's biased towards appreciating free expression rather than limiting it, I think it lends itself to a lot of really, really good discussion.
All right, thank you. Another question we had, and Julie, I'll ask you to answer this. How can we maximize engagement and discussion with large lecture hall-sized classrooms after a film viewing?
Yeah, you know, I think first of all, my recommendation for any classroom or other programming that involves a film and more conversation is always this: the film should be first, because if people aren't feeling ready to engage going in, as Ian suggested, like if a film is a doorway not only to conversation and to reading for that matter, that's always like one of my big Q&A things when people are asking more questions. I'm like, this film did not tell you everything you need to know. Like now read books. Like like a film is a start. But you know, I would say that actually film screenings work fantastic in a large lecture situation. It's a really a special experience to sit in a room full of people watching and experiencing a film together, especially films that have moments of humor, as I think all 4 of our films do. And then planning for a conversation that stems from like a little piece, you know, if there's a way to get somebody that was in the film, not necessarily the star of the film, but like somebody who had an interesting role. I know, you know, our RBG has a number of people who were involved in, you know, who aren't famous names, who were involved, who are plaintiffs in cases that Justice Ginsburg brought to the court. Like the film can only tell 2 or 3 minutes of their story. It's such a launching point to talk about more things. So I think having kind of relevant people that you're going to be more interested in, having just seen the film, ready to go on Zoom, or have it, you know, some of the films, including RBG, do have curriculum guides. But I guess my big my main pro tip is film first. Like when all the preamble to conversation before film starts, you're just waiting to see the film. In fact, even seeing the trailers for all 4 films, like even those I've already seen, it, you know, my first thing is like, hey, now I just want to like watch the full film. So and then that really gets you drawn in.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Okay, here's an audience question from Effie. She says, I work as a literacy lead for a region supporting 30 K-12 public school districts in Southwest Washington, ranging in size from 35 students to 22,000 students. Wow. What is the best way to share this information and support them in making connections to their existing curriculum and standards at this level? I wonder, I think I might be able to address this question and take it off the filmmakers. It's a great question. And I think that, you know, through academic video online, you can access where there are discussion guides and curriculum already associated or attached to the film. You can find those there. I also think that we'll definitely have someone from Avon Academic Video Online contact you to give you a number of ways. We particularly love all of our films on Film Platform. So Film Platform can be found on Avon, and in that collection you will find this level of documentary film and storytelling that you're hearing about today. So I can say with full confidence that any of the films in that collection are going to be super valuable and engaging students in all kinds of areas. And it's because the craft and the art of the documentary is such that it really holds the attention of the viewer, so your student. So I would check those films out first, and you'll probably find many that will work for a lot of these different audiences. So thanks for what you do, Effie. Okay. I think we are getting close to the end of time here. So I would love to take a sneak peek at what's coming up in the Film Platform collection for the fall of 2025, and enjoy this reel. Thank you.
I'm doing a criminal investigation into some of your staff. Essentially, the librarians are my suspects.
Have you a real love of people, books, and learning? You may well consider the vocation of a librarian.
It didn't dawn on us that we would come under attack.
The word I have on my heart is repentance. We have librarians who are misunderstanding what is healthy and good for children.
When I was first attacked, a student's mother was calling me a pornographer, pedophile, and groomer of children.
This, do not interrupt my time.
जिस तरह से औरतों के साथ लगातार उत्पीड़न के मामले सामने आ रहे हैं, हमें खुद से पूछना होगा, क्या हमारे देश के बुनियादी ढांचे में कोई कमी तो नहीं।
जानते हैं ना आपके गांव में एक घटना घटा है जिसमें एक 13 साल की बच्ची के साथ बलात्कार हुआ है।
तो लड़का या लड़की की कोई तो दो करना नहीं रहे।
बोल रहा था कि अगर किसी को बताएगी तो मार देंगे।
When I first met Katya, that was the first time actually that I had the definition of undiagnosed.
Without a diagnosis, these patients don't have any medical home, they don't have any support network.
There are so many needless bits of suffering, missed opportunities to discover. We're not learning. We're not a learning healthcare system.
The undiagnosed disease population provides such precious, important information.
She's clearly hyper-reflexic.
It really will take a village for us to create a better system to diagnose patients.
Ready-made. Ready-made.
What if the person behind the urinal was not Duchamp?
This changes everything.
A woman once described as a combination of Jesus Christ and Shakespeare rolled into one.
Baroness Elsa von Freytag-Loringhoven.
Baroness Elsa von Freytag-Loringhoven.
Fido, Baronessa Elsa von Freytag-Loringhoven.
Baronessa Dada.
She wasn't written out of history, but she was never written in it.
Det her er min fars hjemmevideo. Han har lige købt et kamera, så han filmer bare alt han ser. Det er her vi bor. En forstad i Norge, omgivet af bjerge. Det her er mig. Det her er min irriterende og mærkelige lillebror, Frederik. Og min mor.
Christoffer?
Og det her er Christoffer. Det er på grund af ham, min far har købt kameraet. For at bevare så meget som muligt, mens det endnu kan lade sig gøre.
Você faz filma? Você faz filma?
Вот сколько я себя помню, я всегда рисовала.
Наша робота у співавторстві, вона була, власне кажучи, питанням часу. Ми звичайні люди у надзвичайній ситуації. В Україні це війна професійних нападників проти захисників-аматорів.
Прилетіли. От і що летять?
Серед іншого письменників, музикантів, вчителів, художників.
Well, I see the trailers and I want to watch all of them right now. I just want to really thank the filmmakers who joined us today and the many others that bring us these films. It takes so much to bring one of these films to the place where they are now, where they're available for distribution. It takes years and years of work and fundraising. So I just thank each and every one of you for your craft and your dedication. Without you, we wouldn't know so many of these stories. I certainly wouldn't. So thank you, Julie, Yael, Ian, and Dawn, for bringing us these stories. And thank you all for joining us today for the Meet the Filmmakers Igniting Classrooms discussions. We hope this inspired you to explore the relevance, depth, and breadth of documentaries. And we hope that they'll continue to support faculty and curriculum and enhance student learning on your campus. So don't forget to check out Film Platform, available in academic video online. That is from ProQuest. So to access those films, you can reach out to ProQuest if you don't already have academic video online on your campus. And once you do, you will open up a world of all these amazing films. Also keep an eye in your inbox for a recording of today's webinar. And thanks again. Have a great day.
All right, likewise, thanks so much to Ian, Yael, Dawn, and Julie for taking the time to speak with us today. And thank you, Annie, for moderating the discussion. And of course, to ProQuest and Film Platform for their support. And thank you as well to the attendees for joining us. I'd like to remind our viewers that we did record today's program, so be on the lookout for a follow-up email from Choice with a link to that recording. And if you have a few minutes after this presentation, please do fill out a brief survey. We would really appreciate that. And thanks again to all of you out there for joining us. We hope you learned something new from the session, and we hope to see you again for another webinar. Take care.